what is the role of the artist or the role of his own practice, which of course is something that would also, could be, read and found, extending quite a lot, finding, many possible definitions, which of course, would bring us also quite distant. To me, my point of view here, it's something related to these modes, or let's say these means of transmission. So to me, this is something like a crucial question that we've seen developed in, let's say, at least in the latest 15 years, in recent contemporary art practice, that has really also taken and brought art practice in a very specific series of, let's say, context and domains. And starting really from Stefano's very, would now imply a positive meaning of the word, peculiar way of, entering within specific fields of operation, really practice. I've been quite surprised, in the sense that his own attitude, let's say what we could define as a modus operandi, a way of really working. It's somehow consisting in a kind of, I would define it, viral methodology. I mean, by implying with viral something which is quite close to virus. So in that sense, not only, let's say the topics or, the areas of reflection that are part of, the big statements that are so much part of Stefano's artworks and art practice, as that can be testified, by the video works, sculpture installation, but also kind of really movable work, because all the recent work that he has developed over these recent years, these kind of movable devices, like the cars, this kind of campaign that looks exactly like advertisement campaign or some kind of counter-information, spreading of counter-information. That's something that's very much, it's close to the idea of a viral spreading all over operating methodology. So in this sense, I'm interested in finding Stefano's approach like something that looks exactly like something which is somehow mimicking, so it's like somehow a way of having a mimetic approach. So in this sense, I'm speaking about, again, like borrowing a word, which is, of course, mimetic has to do with, of course, mimicry is somehow also something that we know is very much related to biology. It's, of course, this kind of relation with, an organism is evolving and adopting in a kind of, positive way specific features, and so resembling to another species. In that sense, this kind of covering up and extension of specific features, and in terms of spreading and moving, covering different areas, it's something that I found increasingly present in Stefano's work, and it's something really manifesting in recent works. So in that sense, the whole idea of mobility is something that we would easily find in his work with the cars, the vans, circulating really in a physical way over Europe, touching a specific art center, art context, art situation. It's really something that is manifesting itself by adopting, in that sense, methodologies and approaches and way of working that are completely also part of different practice that are not necessarily usually defined as art. And in that sense, I like this kind of ambiguity that is very much part of this practice, that it's something that at first look cannot be immediately recognized from probably what is most of the, the kind of common public, and recognized as a kind of art intervention. So in that sense, I think also it's interesting because the whole point of bringing a reflection to a specific topic, a specific kind of provocation in Stefano's practice is not something that is immediately defined as a way already of trying to close down, defining, and in the sense circumscribing the area of reflection. On the contrary, it looks more like an opening up, because it's really like a first kind of, it has this kind of immediacy, this kind of visual power that is, of course, it looks mostly like kind of let's say, advertising campaign that has, of course, this kind of immediate bright, you don't know how exactly how to define the presence. And in that sense, the mimetic approach, as I would like to find and to describe here, is not just something that, in the sense, we would now define as something that has to take part in, what is usually here defined as the state of things, the state of, reflection. But it's much more like becoming part. So in that sense, I'm interested that by adopting specific strategies, the work, the methodology, the approach, the attitude is exactly like providing you with exactly that level of course, at first sight, ambiguity, but it's much more like concrete, immediate practice that is already what is already the whole area of reflection about. And in that sense, of course, the whole tradition of, when speaking about mimetic approach, of course, it goes back with many areas of references that, of course, are so much related also to history, and of course, it has to go back to the idea of something which, in the ancient times was definitely defined as mimetikos, so imitative, something that imitates. But the whole idea, to, of course, goes closer to imitation. Of course, has to do with, so many, and in that sense, the whole range of meaning. It's something that has to do with representation, with imitation, similarities, resemblance, even a whole way of presenting. But presenting not in just, something that, it's easily recognizable already as a comment, but it's really at the whole, intervention itself. So in that sense, I'm interested because how then is it possible then to attain, to result, to come closer to a certain, kind of communication, in that sense, kind of really touching, like the heart of, what is usually considered as this kind of transmission. By means, of a certain kind of attitude. The whole level, in the sense, for me, again, is very interesting to be found here, is something that has to do not just, usually there are different ways of defining something which is efficient, something that, works because it's immediate. And in that sense, of course, light, communication device has this kind of immediacy that is like, okay, it's bright, it's clear, it's somehow communicative. But instead of, I would just like in that sense also to refer just very briefly to a couple of definitions that, of course, are not mine. They have been studied and defined also by people much better into this whole reflection on this area of reflection. And in the sense, there is specifically China philosophy and China thought specialist from France. His name is Francesco. And this professor has been really speaking about the different levels and layers of how the communicative system can be working at the level, and this is really an interesting comparison between what he defined as efficacité against efficience, which is the efficacity against the efficiency. And in that sense, our models here, the usual European models, it's something that is very much, working is a very somehow chain working kind of system, which is really usually adopted as a plan, model, and very kind of schematic, and in that sense very in that sense tightly constructed in a very mechanistic way. This is really the efficacity kind of model. And of course, it's very much just based on action. And of course, it obviously is very direct. The other model, which is somehow found in the Chinese mentality, in the Chinese reference, set of references, is the efficiency kind of model. And this model, the result, of course, has to be there, but it's somehow different, because it's not so much mechanistically, conceived. It's much more based on a kind of potential, this inherent, already present in the way of working, in the way, and it's very much also based in the situation.